for coming. My name is Diane Srebro. I'm the Assistant Head of Adult Services here. And this type of program that you've come to attend this evening has become somewhat of a trend. Librarians are responding to the rising tide of what we've heard as fake news with programs such as this that are designed to teach students of all ages critical literacy skills to determine fact from fiction. As our digital economy continues to develop, information consumers must be made aware of data manipulation, and students require instruction to comprehend exposure to information, what I call trash, in order to locate objective truths. The Illinois Library Association recently published an article in their quarterly journal, The Reporter, which I have here, that identified what separates fake news from traditional reporting. According to Northern Illinois librarians Wayne Finley and Beth McGowan, along with Joanna Kluver of Julia Hall District Library, the process of production itself determines whether a news report or a classroom resource may be considered credible. Traditional journalism relies on a rigorous editorial process based upon evidence and fact-checking. In education, lesson plans and testing are conducted to ensure individuals achieve a standard of subject knowledge. Libraries operate with similar intent. In Illinois, librarians engage in digital transactions while working with research databases and search engines. Librarians steward balanced collections based upon public policy and procedures. The public library specifically offers instruction on accessing data accumulated for specific populations and advocating for education. Our speakers this evening include Joe Biss, who is editor of the Daily Southtown, Lake County's News Sun, and Post-Tribune since 2010. Prior to this post, he was State House reporter for the Associated Press based in Frankfort, Kentucky, where he covered state government and politics. Amy Hamernick, school media librarian at the Orland Park District 135, teaches information literacy and digital citizenship at Century Junior High. She's done this since 2012. She received a master's in curriculum and instruction from Governor State and has a certificate in library information as a library information specialist. Laura Lorenz Collins is a faculty member at Moraine Valley Community College in the psychology department. And finally, Deirdre Rawls is a research librarian and branch coordinator at Robert Morris University here in Orland Park, where she's worked since 2003. How this will work is we're going to have one speaker at a time come up to the podium, complete a presentation, an educational presentation, starting with Amy. I think we agreed. And then we'll get a little bit of a technical assistance with our PowerPoint presentations as we move along. And please reserve your questions for after all four speakers have had a chance to talk this evening, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. Okay? Have a nice program.
Hi everybody, again I am Amy Hamernick. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we do at Century Junior High and the 3 other junior highs in the Orland School District. I will say that it's always evolving. We've been teaching some sort of media literacy for, I counted back 10 years. It always didn't have that name to it. We started as internet safety and then kind of evolved and developed, and now we went, digital citizenship, and media literacy becoming a very common term in our libraries as we talk with our students. So again, this is just a little bit of just a snapshot of how we prepare our students of Orland Park to really navigate and find the truth with all of the just unbelievable amount of resources that are available. So our basic curriculum hits 3 general areas, which is literature appreciation, library skills, and research-based learning. And a lot of what that media literacy falls under that research-based learning piece. In the middle school, students see the media specialist every other week. And at that point, we also have to have a little bit of time for checkout for books. And we do the best we can with the time we have to give them opportunities to talk with us and for us to show them those life skills that they're developing with us and how to look at the internet with a unbiased eye and understand that there's going to be lots of junk, as we previously said, that they're going to have to navigate. In addition, lots of us schedule multiple other classes and lessons with the classroom teachers because we really want it to stick with them, and we want it to interweave within their daily lessons as they go through with all their social studies and math and science classes as well. So the information literacy lessons and then fake news units are where we honed in on in the past year or two to really bring forth these concepts that the students will then start looking with a more accurate eye at what they're looking at. In the past, we referred to it always as, the web evaluation. You have to evaluate the websites. You have to evaluate your sources. And that's really what we're teaching them again here, how to look through this information with a keen eye and how to look for fake news and fake information. It's just kind of evolved a little bit in the language and in the skill set. Like I said before, we really want to, we kind of look at it 3 ways as we're teaching. It can't be something that they do one time with us and then they walk away and never think of it again. We truly encourage them to think about what you're doing today, include it in, when you go onto your personal, Facebook pages or Twitters or Instagrams, and when you look at what's out there, that little thing Ms. Cameron said before, think about that too, as you're looking at your own personal material, things that are of your personal interest. And then again, we really want to intertwine that to the curriculum of each classroom and content area as well. So we do that just by coordinating with the classroom teachers and making sure that what our guidelines are infused into those classrooms. So some examples of things that we talk about with the students in terms of website or source evaluation. We always go back to some of the key pieces of how can you trust this, how do you know that this piece of information is accurate and real and not produced to persuade you in a wrong direction, or as fake news, or as something completely biased. So some of the basic questions that we start with, that we really stay on these for a long time throughout their 3 years with us, and we repeat and come back because it needs to be practiced and constantly used. Teaching them how to find the source. If there's no author, how do you know who wrote it, where did it come from? Why didn't they put a name to it? Is there a reason they're not acknowledging who they are and why they're writing what they're writing? Comparing what you already know. You have prior knowledge, you have common sense as well. If it just doesn't seem like it doesn't match up, then you need to do some more research, you need to look in other places. Can the information be triangulated? We talk to them often about, is it being presented in other reliable sources? If you cannot find that piece of information or that quote or that statistic in the same place, or in that same information in other vetted, reliable, credible sources, then maybe you need to think about whether or not that is really an accurate piece of information to use. Again, the author and whether or not they're credible. When I tell them, yes, you have found the author, who is that person? Did you Google them? Did you go to their university? Did you look up their previous research pieces and things of that nature? No, but I got their name. You still have to look beyond that. And they kind of look at me like, I still have to Google more stuff when I already found what I wanted to find on Google? Yes, you have to dig deeper. And then again, how current is that information? What's the copyright date? Again, these are things that sometimes they can't even find the copyright date, or sometimes there's often not dates listed. And they have a hard time understanding why we can't use that. So we often come back to these constantly so that we can just remind them, these are some of the basics that we really need to always think about. When working with classes as they're going through on projects, I always remind them there's those quick tips, things that you can, skills that they need to continuously develop. Learning how to read the URL and domain names. They often know the domain names, .gov, .com, .org, but what happens when it's .com, .co? Who's that? Well, a lot of times other various countries have symbols or letters attached to their .com, so .co is Colombia. Well, there's a lot of fake and biased news coming out of different countries that they're attacking America, especially, or directing towards America to create misinformation or to create panic. So teaching them to read the URLs and slow down. when you're learning to read a URL, there's a lot of bits and pieces to make up that URL. And over time, when you notice the slight little differences within a URL, little things will pop out to you like, oh, there's an exclamation point in that URL. That's very awkward. That's not normal. That is a red flag. So we're teaching them to do that. Always investigate the About Us section, the Contact Us section. And again, who are those people? Question everything. I always tell them if there's something in quotes, question it, look it up. Is it really the quote? Is that really who said that? There's been a lot of instances over the past year where things have been posted on Twitter and social media as being quoted by this person or that person, and with a quick search you can find that it was misquoted and misrepresented. So I always tell them to make sure you're doing that. And in the world of social media, we all know that comments can come fast and furious on articles, on posts, whatever it may be. Look at those comments that just everyday people are posting as they're reading it. Those comments can tell you if you get, there's 300 comments and, the first 5 or 10 you read are all, oh, this is fake, this is fake, this is fake. Well, chances are it might really be fake. So move on. I know even I myself, if I look at a headline and I'm like, oh, this is clearly clickbait, but I am kind of curious, I'll click on the comments. Right away, I find the answer, what was the real story, and I move on my way. So we teach them to use those comments to their advantage as opposed to using those comments as credible information. The other piece, little tidbit we always talk about in practice with them is doing a reverse image search through Google. Have anyone ever done the reverse image search? So now Google has advanced to the point where they make it super duper duper easy. If you right click on an image, it'll say search for image in Google. One of the options. All you have to do is search for that image in Google, and you'll be amazed at how many images are actually repeated consistently through various other articles. The reason we have them do this is because most often hoaxers or biased websites, things like that.
I'm sorry, I know I just did the questions of the what I was about to say, unbiased, maybe even hackers or implementers that create these web URLs out of a static IP that may be a threat to those who click on it. I've handled a situation where I'm an IT major. I also went to Governor State, just recently graduated. I'm sorry.
Okay. So essentially when they're able to look at the results of the reverse image search, they can see the possibility of having other uncredible sources using those same images. Okay, hold on to the thank you. Some other big ideas that we talk about throughout our lessons in terms of media literacy is confirmation bias, which we all have to some degree. None of us is completely unbiased. So when we're reading something that is really hitting home with us, we're going to believe it because it's what we believe in. It's who we are. And whether or not there is some truth or untruth to that makes it a little bit harder for us as human beings to dissect sometimes, because I want to believe it, so I'm going to just continue reading, and it's great. I'm going to forward this, I'm going to share this, I'm going to believe this, and everything that's in with it. And hey, I might learn something new, and it's got to be true because I already want to believe it. So that's something we talk about. Circular reporting is essentially when misinformation is spread very quickly. This happens a lot in terms of like quick disasters or very sensational news, where it's spreading so fast that the wrong information just keeps getting picked up, sometimes even by credible sources like our standard news channels, ABC, NBC, etc., and then other people continue to quote it because NBC quoted it. NBC passed it on, although it's wrong. So a lot of times this is when most often spread in quick scenarios. We talk a lot about user-generated content. In these days, everybody's a journalist. Anybody can get online and post anything. And a lot of the fake news issues that we had in the past recent year or so, a lot of that people were just looking to make money. I can be a journalist. I can write an article about Trump or Hillary, and I can say whatever I want to say. And I can make it look as horrible as I want, and all of those who want to believe it, who confirm to it, are going to click on my websites, and I am going to make money. There was one particular article that I pulled out and shared with some of my 8th graders throughout the year, and there was two gentlemen, I can't remember where they're from, they were like in their early 20s, didn't really have great jobs, and started writing these sensational articles. They were literally making $16 a click because they had become so popular. User-generated content, everyone's a journalist. So you have to really look at the writing of the people who are presenting it. So we talk about that. We also talk a lot about the diversity of viewpoint versus the accuracy of information. So is it skewed information, or is there just a mistake, or is it biased information? Is it biased viewpoints? So we talk a lot about that as well. So we developed, my 8th grade team and I developed a big unit this year for 8th grade. We did one for 7th grade, I'll kind of show you as well. But just to kind of give you an idea of what they get exposed to in terms of lessons, so how we're preparing them to move on to high school or college. TED Ed, if you have never explored TED Ed, it's a pretty great place to go around and meander about. But how to choose your news, there's a great link here. I'll let you guys click on it if you want on your own. It's a little video, kind of walks you through a lot of the things that can happen when you get lost in the various news sources. Which brings us then to the news outlets. And I'll show you this one. This was a graphic organizer that went viral about mid-school year for me. And the original actually had news outlets everywhere. The Blaze, InfoWars, CNN, NBC, any news outlet you'd ever see was already placed, pigeonholed into these by the creator. And like we all know, everyone has some bias to some point or another. She then posted a blank one because she got a lot of attention. And we used this as part of that lesson. We went to some of these websites, our news organization websites, and we had the kids evaluate them. And where do you think they would fit? And how do we use this? And how do we look at this? And why is it important to know that there's a conservative side and a liberal side? And how does that fit into our news world? So we use this with our 8th graders for that lesson. Headline spin, we took a lot of touchy, risky, hot topic headlines, and we talked about how they were spun. Were they spun to be more conservative? Were they spun to be more liberal? Who were they aiming their headlines at? Who were they trying to get to read them? What population were they targeting? And then we actually had our kids write a headline. We had them spin it, and the topic was lunchtime at CJH. What is your lunch period like? And they had to spin that topic or that headline to make it seem either very conservative or very liberal in how they could get a reader's attention. And then the alternative facts, there was that very viral Meet the Press with Kellyanne Conway when she kind of first said the term alternative facts. And we talked a lot about how alternative facts, what that means, how does it apply to your life, how does it apply to what you see online. So this was our 8th grade unit. And our 7th grade unit was a little bit more condensed. We talked a lot about the difference between satire, clickbait, fake, credible, in terms of the social media world where they live online. There's another TED Ed video that you can take a look at. And then to kind of quell some rumors, the habit of rumors within schools, we really wanted to focus on that. So there's a board game called Telestrations. If you haven't ever played it or used it, you should. You can play the way the game tells you, or in the classroom environment, we can make up our own terms and topics and words that we want them to use with the game. And so that's what we did here for this unit. There's some new things happening that I plan to incorporate that I'd just like to show you. There's Factitious, which recently came out this summer. And it's a game that allows you kind of to swipe right or left. And essentially it gives you an article. And you can read the article. They're all real articles that have been posted somewhere. And you can show the source so that you know where it came from. This came from the Telegraph website. And within the article, you have to find the clues that would say, yes, this is credible, or no, this is probably not credible. And this is a perfect opportunity for our students to put into practice those evaluation skills. What do I look for when I'm reading an article to decide if it's credible or not credible? And then once you decide if it's credible or not credible, it'll tell you if you're correct or incorrect.
Nice.
So this is a new thing that came out recently. And then just the concept behind this infographic, I came across this the other day, and it really intrigued me. So I would just, sorry, I'm going to zoom in here, right? Sorry, too far. You know, even in my role, I don't expand this far in the classroom, but, you know, it's something that I know our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders can wrap their minds around if introduced to it. So just some other kinds of misinformation, like pseudoscience or conspiracy theories, or, you know, we talk about propaganda within our content areas. But just a nice way to look at some of the other stuff, you know, that's out there and how it's, you know, what the motivation is behind it and why people use it. So I have that available to you as well. And everything I'm showing you today I have available for you. I encourage them to be fact checkers. There's lots of fact checking websites out there, but all of these are very useful. Snopes has been around for years. Factcheck.org, PolitiFact, those are obviously more you know, politically connected. But Snopes started out as an urban legend, you know, researcher, and it's developed past that now. So anything that comes up online, whether it be political or not, you can find that there. And Emergent is rather new as well. I've been finding some good use of that. And last, just a couple of my favorite places to look. There's some articles here, and Julie Smith has been a blogger about media literacy for years and years and years. And Media Literacy Now is a group that tries to get media literacy into law in every state and city across the country. And then Common Sense Media has lots of information for parents on media literacy, tons of information that you can go through that I just wanted to share with you as well. I will say that if you go to the Century Junior High website, I posted this presentation with all of its links and such on the Media Center website for Century Junior High. So it's under media literacy there. Okay, so I'm not going to click on everything. You guys can explore on your own. But if you have any questions, you can always email me as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was a great presentation on different resources that are out there to help kids and adults as well to identify fake news and to figure out what's real and what's fake. My presentation comes at this topic from a little bit of a different angle. I'm a social psychologist, and so I think about and I talk a lot about with my students why we get taken in by fake news. So I'm going to focus on the psychology of fake news. And as you guys know, there's been just tons and tons of fake news stories, especially during this last election cycle. And I think an interesting thing to think about is why do we get taken in by these? So many of them seem so clearly not real, so clearly fake, you know, in retrospect. Why are we all getting taken in by them? Well, one thing to note is, you know, just how many have been taken in. The top 20 fake news stories triggered more clicks than the top 20 real ones by the time the election came around. And that's clearly a problem. People are basing their decisions on misinformation. We do know that 44% of adults get their news from Facebook. And a lot of times those individuals are just looking at the title, they're seeing if it confirms their belief, and they're really not even going into the article itself. They're just passing it on to their friends, and then those stories get passed around quickly. And as our previous speaker talked about, a lot of these stories are being written by teenagers in other countries who are making quite a bit of money from selling ads. So again, the question I want to focus on is, why do we believe fake news? And I think that the answer to this lies, at least in part, in how we are wired, how our brains are wired. So I want to talk to you about two ways of thinking. Okay, these are two primary ways that we think about everything. The way we think about our lives, the way we think about other people, situations, everything. We generally have these two pathways, okay? We have something called central processing, and we have something called peripheral processing. Now, central processing is rational, it's logical, it requires both motivation and effort. So we both have to be motivated to do it, and we have to have the mental resources to be able to do it, okay? Most of us like to think of ourselves as central processors, that most of the time we're walking around, we're thinking rationally, we're thinking logically, we're making all of our decisions from this well-reasoned place. Those other people who are peripheral processors, okay? That's the way a lot of people think about themselves. Now, peripheral processing is automatic processing. It's processing you don't really have to think about too much. It's pattern-based, it's intuitive, it doesn't require a lot of attention. And again, a lot of us like to think that we are central processors, but here's the deal. What research has shown is that the vast majority of our decisions are made through peripheral processing. And actually, if we were to be central processors, if we were to really rationally and think through everything, like say Spock from Star Trek, we wouldn't be able to function. The information would be too overwhelming. There was actually a case study of a gentleman who had a stroke in the part of the brain that seems to be really well linked with peripheral processing. He wasn't able to process peripherally very well. He was very, very rational and logical. And he had a full-time job, he had a wife, he had kids, he had a home, he had friends. And after that medical condition, when that part of the brain wasn't functioning anymore, he lost his job, his wife divorced him, his kids wouldn't talk to him anymore, and he ended up homeless. Why? Because he couldn't make decisions. So every decision had to be rational and logical, and there's just too much information to process. So he would be paralyzed by every decision. Think about the cereal aisle, just for instance. If you try to make a rational, logical decision on price, on taste, calories, sugar, health, there are hundreds, probably more than 100 cereal options to choose from. We'd be sitting there for hours, and we wouldn't be able to make a decision. So we could think about peripheral processing as lazy, or we could think about it as efficient. Either way that you look at it, it is the dominant form that our thinking and our decision-taking takes. So we are all cognitive misers to some degree or another. We spend most of our day making decisions based on our intuition and our emotion as opposed to our reason and our logic. And again, just to reiterate, why is this? One, because we've got to combine very limited capacity with an extreme amount of information. Okay, so we are cognitive misers. We do use a lot of peripheral processing. So that means we are constantly looking for patterns. In our day-to-day life, we're constantly looking for patterns. One example of that pattern detecting piece of us is, what we've done with our stars. We look up into the stars and we see things in the stars that we are putting there. Okay, those patterns weren't there unto themselves. We project the patterns. We project things that make sense to us. Do you guys see? Maybe you can't see that grilled cheese very well. Whoops.
I saw it.
Yeah, that's the face of Jesus. And, people will see things on paint or sidewalks or grilled cheese sandwiches that aren't necessarily there, But our brain is constantly searching for patterns, just intuitively, and all of a sudden that image pops out to us. So this means that we don't have to think critically, we can think automatically. Well, what does this have to do with fake news? Well, it turns out that fake news basically takes advantage of these cognitive shortcuts. Okay, so we label these general shortcuts heuristics. Again, these are cognitive shortcuts. They're efficient, pattern-based ways of thinking about the world. And they make up, again, a majority of how we interact with the world around us. They happen without a lot of conscious process. And because they're automatic and because they're things that we share as humans, it's somewhat easier, I suppose, to attack them as opposed to trying to attack rational thought. Okay, because most of the time we're on autopilot. So the first heuristic or cognitive shortcut was something that was already mentioned, and that was confirmation bias. Now, confirmation bias, as was already mentioned, is that we seek to confirm the things that we already believe. We seek to confirm the things that we expect. However, it goes even farther than just, we seek these things out. So it is what we seek out. It is the information that we look for. But it's also the information that we pay attention to. So, we're not good at processing all of the information in a situation. We tend to cherry pick the things that conform to our expectations. So if you go see a movie, for example, with your significant other or with a friend, and you really knew that that movie was just going to be an awful movie, you didn't want to go see it in the first place, you wanted to go see the other one, but you got bullied into seeing this stupid movie, okay? So when you see the movie, you're going to pick out all of the things that you thought made it a terrible movie. And the person that you go with, they're going to pick out the things that they thought made it great. And in essence, that gives you two different experiences. You might not even be able to agree on exactly what was in the movie because you were focused on the things that made it bad and the other person was focused on the things that made it good. I think we all have had that experience with different things that we've gone through. So it does impact what we pay attention to. It impacts what we believe. We believe stories that are consistent with our expectations. When you see a headline, a fake news headline that's consistent with your belief, you are much more likely to believe it than if it's inconsistent. It helps us to interpret. How do we interpret what we are seeing and what we are experiencing? This is another important piece. It also gives us an idea of what to ignore, what to not focus on, what to throw out from that experience. It tells us what to remember. And one of the most important pieces, I think one of the most interesting pieces here, is it also tells us what to misremember. So a lot of us think of our memory as a videotape. It's just taping everything as we experience it. Over the last 20 to 30 years, a lot of psychological researchers have discovered that's not at all how memory works. And in fact, memory is very much, is profoundly affected by what we believe and what we expect. So much so that not only do we remember what's consistent with our expectations, but we can also skew the information and slant the information and misremember. We add in details that weren't even in that original occurrence. There's a great study where I'll just really briefly give you the general gist of the study. What they did is they had participants come in, the participants watched a videotape of a convenience store. It was really boring videotape, and they watched a cashier transaction after transaction after transaction. And then all of a sudden, someone comes in with a gun, they rob the cashier. It was very fast, just like a regular burglary would be. And then they stopped the tape, and they said, okay, I'd like to ask you some questions about what you just saw. Okay, so what was the person with the gun wearing? Was the person wearing a hat? Did he have a mustache? So they went through all of these different factors. And this is, I'm sure you guys have heard of eyewitness testimony. There's a lot of research on eyewitness testimony. But one of the things that strikes me when we're talking about confirmation bias is that about a quarter of the people in the study said that the cashier was of one race and the assailant, person with the gun, was of another race. Now that was true, but in actuality, the cashier was African American and the assailant was Caucasian. And about a quarter of people mixed up the race of the cashier and the assailant. Now they had just seen the video. They had just seen it 10 minutes earlier. They had just seen it. Okay, so about a quarter of people just automatically did that. Now when they were asked, you know, tell us about this aspect of what you remember, you know, the people who misremembered, they didn't do it on purpose, they didn't intend to misremember, they weren't intentionally lying, but they had reinterpreted what had happened. They had misremembered. And there's study after study after study that shows that we add details in, we fill the holes in of our memory with things that are consistent with our beliefs and expectations. And that's a problem when we're talking about fake news. So we're pretty limited on time tonight. I don't have a whole lot more time, but I did want you guys to know there are a lot more biases that are out there. There are a lot more heuristics that are out there. Let me give you maybe just, I don't know, 2 or 3 more. I'll do them really quickly. One is called the availability heuristic. This is more vivid a story. The easier it comes to mind, the more likely it is to be remembered. So, for example, when you think about, is it more likely for us to die in a terrorist attack, or is it more likely for us to die falling down the stairs? Most of us feel like the terrorist attack is more of a threat. And certainly we spend a lot more money on terrorism than we do on safety of bathtubs or safety in bathrooms. But currently, the risk of dying in a terrorist attack in the United States is about 1 in 20 million. 1 in 20 million. The risk of dying from falling is about 1 in 133. Wow. So it's just an enormous difference between what we perceive as the risk versus what the actual risk is. So how does this relate to fake news? Well, fake news can make the story more vivid and more detailed. We're more likely to believe that it's real. We're more likely to believe that it's a threat. Now the ingredient adjustment heuristic, with this one, what happens is that the fake news story is provided as an anchor. So it anchors our beliefs. So we hear that, let's say a congressman did something really horrible, okay? And I mean really, really horrible. We hear this as a news story. Now the next day it's corrected. CNN comes on and they say, you know what, we screwed up, we're sorry. We didn't check all our facts. This is incorrect, it's inaccurate. It turns out that just hearing that news story, even when we're told, even when we believe that it was fake, it still pulls down our feelings and emotions about that congressman. Okay, so just putting that news story out there, even when we know it's fake, can impact how we feel about a person or subject. I guess I'll just do one more. I've got a ton of them, but one more, and that is the backfire effect. And that is when we are given contradictory information, oftentimes we find it threatening, and it actually increases our beliefs in our original information. Now this is true when that information is tied to our identity. When it's something that we believe strongly and it helps to identify who we are. We think of ourselves as this kind of person. When we get information that threatens those beliefs, what's happening in the brain is that there's this little set of structures in the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala get turned on when we are under threat, when we're really stressed out. If you guys have ever had a police officer come up behind you with their lights on, and your heart starts racing, and you might start shaking a little bit, you start perspiring a little bit, that's your amygdala that's turned on in your brain, and it started the stress response. When those amygdala are turned on, we're not thinking rationally. Okay, we're not able to think completely logically anymore. The amygdala tends to shut down logical thinking, which is happening in the prefrontal cortex. Okay, so those amygdala take over. And that is actually what happens with the backfire effect. They've done some new studies where they put participants under an MRI machine to see, what's going on in their brain when they're given these fake news stories. Now, when they're given a news story that's fake, that's about something they don't really care about, like who invented the light bulb. And they say, actually, what you thought all these years is not true. The inventor of the light bulb is Thomas Smith. Here are our sources. People process that in their frontal lobes. They consider what the news story is telling them. They give it more of a rational, logical consideration. However, and you can see that on the MRI, you can see it in the frontal lobes. However, when they're given a fake news story that says, we should increase our military spending because XYZ, what happens is that the amygdala light up and they take over. And then people feel threatened and they dig in instead of carefully considering, what the article is saying. So I don't want to take up more time. I think I'll end on that. If you are interested, I could, post the PowerPoint, the entire PowerPoint somewhere so that you have a way to read through the rest.
So, in keeping with the theme that you put the story up here, have you guys gone to the grocery store lately and you saw that your receipt and the groceries are getting more and more expensive? Here's your answer. You'd be coming from there. Okay.
Oh my God. Oh God.
Of course, this is fake, but I just had to throw that. My name is Diane Srebro. I am the reference librarian and the branch coordinator for the Orland Park campus of Robert Morris University. For those of you who don't know Robert Morris, here's a little background about it. We have multiple locations. Our main campus is in Chicago. We have Arlington Heights, Elgin, Waukegan, Schaumburg. Here in Orland, we also have Peoria and Springfield. We grant bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and associate's degrees. We are on 10-week course, so things kind of are accelerated. I want to show you some of our course offerings. So here's a college of study and some of our institutes. So within those courses, students have some sort of research project or paper that they have to complete. And when we talk to them about it, we want them to think about some of these terms. We want them to always make sure that they evaluate the quality of their online information or any information that they seek, and think about all the dimensions of the research. The way we do this, and much like in the middle schools, we go into the classroom. We go immediately in the 100 level, which we call R&D 101. In those 100 level courses, however, we don't go really into depth about their research. It's basically introducing them again to databases, teaching them some of the features of the databases, and just the basic navigation of the databases. As they progress into the 200 level, 400 level classes, when things become more rigorous, that's when we really hit the databases hard. We take them through actual searches. We teach them how to pull out the relevant articles. We tell them how to read the abstract to make sure that article is going to cover what the project requires. And we want them to think critically about these results. So number one, we want them to use reasoned judgments about the quality of the information. We want them to make sure that these articles are relevant. Do they fill the project need? Are they accurate? Can these results be verified? Are there any biases in the author or even within ourselves, and we talked about that earlier. When you look at your results, you have to think of those biases that you may have. Are those articles reliable and trustworthy based on the author's background? Is he an expert in that field? Does the journal come from a good publishing source? Is it a scholarly journal? Is it peer reviewed? Those are the things that we want them to think about. And I need to come out of here because I want you to see one of our handouts. So we have a Marketing 370 class, and there's a huge project in that class. And to make our students not go out, not that we don't want them to use Google, but we work closely with the instructors. And what we do as librarians, we compile a list of sources for those students to use that would be directly linked, and they can use them within their project. So as you see, we have a list of ebooks here that they can use for their project. And if we scroll down, we have our databases listed there. So in each of those databases, we show them exactly what they can pull from each of those databases that will be useful in their project. We also link them to some reliable internet sources so that every module that they cover in their paper is covered. Back to the PowerPoint. I'm going to come out one more time. So I put this coming soon slide here because we're in a low census right now, our summer quarter, and we don't have a lot of students around. So there's nothing that's really working. Our databases are down, our website is down. So there's not anything that I can do. But what I plan to do is very much like that handout that you saw, is create one, and I'll show you the rough draft, that's directed to fake news. So that students know exactly where they can go. If they run into a problem with their articles, where they can go to fact check it. We give them a list of books to check, and also some outlets. I need to provide it one more time. And I'm not going to be recreating the wheel here. There are so many organizations, so many other universities that are doing really great things with fake news as far as vetting sources, showing students how to vet sources. And you see, we will connect them to some links here. This is what we plan to do. And we have some books here that talk about fake news. At the bottom, there are some links to articles, current articles about fake news. One last time back to this PowerPoint because I want to give the gentleman time to do this presentation. So it looks something like this. There'll be some links to other sites, infographics. This one infographic is a really nice one. It comes from the International Federation of Library Association and Institutions. The other one, the craft test, which I talked about a little bit, it tells you help students evaluate their sources based on those 5 criteria. That's from the University of California at San Diego. So I would like to end with one more fake news story. You guys think this one is real or is it fake?
The pasture and the on fund after security confiscate is bomb.
Unfortunately, this is a true story.
Real.
They confiscated a pipe bomb from a young man and still allowed him to fly.
Real. It's real.
Thank you.
Thank
And email me as well if you have
There you are. Nice.
That's the urban stage, if you guys are interested.
There you go.
All right,
All right, way to go.
Good man.
thanks for coming out.
Thanks for coming out.
So I'm Joe Visk, I'm the editor of Southtown, and hopefully you all read it and are very familiar with my work there. And as I said, I will adjust on the fly a little bit because everything has been covered. Okay, there you go. So I won't go over things to look for because it's already been covered, but, well, a couple things. So obviously stories shared by email and social media are prime suspects, things to look out for. If you're reading it, and this gets into some of the heretics, if it's something that you're like, yes, that's so awesome, I want that to be true, it's probably not if that's the first time you're hearing it. Because we reporters love the salacious stories, and the minute we get it, I guarantee you it'll be out worldwide. So if you're just getting some prompt, didn't you guys know this? That kind of happened a year ago. A friend of mine who lives in Wheaton posted on her Facebook that Justin Timberlake was moving to Wheaton. And I was like, that's funny, I've been to Wheaton. Why would he move there? Nothing against Wheaton, but I mean, it's not really where Justin Timberlake would move. And so, it was like one of those fake news sites where you can just basically put in whatever you want, and there you go. So some things to look for also, when was the story published? A lot of times, something that was published a year ago or whatever might get recirculated, and then you're seeing it again, and you're like, wait, this is a year-old story. And if there are spelling and grammar errors, that's also an indicator of if it's a non-native English speaker, they might, like in a foreign country, they might write out, do a Google Translator or something and post it online, or it could be artificial intelligence, which is a thing. So even if you want to believe something, don't get suckered, check it out. Who's reliable? We the mainstream media, Daily Southtown, Chicago Tribune, Associated Press, see my bias. But real newspapers, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, local broadcasters. And the main reason is why, and that's because I know everyone can get a blog and a website, I'm not dissing anybody, but we have been trained for this, and we have a proven track record of accuracy, and we also have a code of ethics, and we correct our mistakes. A lot of times you hear about the bad, like CNN recently, well, the fact that they fired those journalists proves the point. We stand by our work in mainstream media, and when we make an error, we correct it, and we claim our mistakes. The AP style book, for any of you who don't know, the AP is basically the predominant style guide that we all follow, and there's lots of different things. And they recently, earlier this year, put in an entry that I thought I'd include that probably more interesting for newspaper geeks like me, but it just says holding politicians and public figures accountable for the word often requires reporting or research. So this is their fact check. And then the term fake news may be used in quotes or a shorthand for the modern phenomenon of deliberate falsehoods or fiction, mass as news circulating on the internet. The reason I include this is if it's it's already in the style book, it's like, oh, you want to back up?
Yeah, I just want to take a screenshot of that. I apologize. This is very compelling. Really quickly. All right, got it. Thank you. Continue.
So, I mean, and the other thing that I didn't read on is, if there is a claim made by a particular candidate or a group or something, it's our obligation to not just take their word for it, but to explore it and to fact check people. And the AP, and we do that, but the AP does a good job. What I'm going to get to here in a second. Of putting out a weekly fake news rundown of all the top viral fake news stories, and I have a couple coming up. But so anyway, we present both sides of the story, and then we tell you what we can and cannot prove. So if there is if you have a question about why we're just not running that story you heard at the gym, it's not necessarily that we haven't heard of it or that we're protecting anyone. A lot of times it's something that can't be proven. So here is this week's. I thought this was fun. This is the AP fake news feed. If you're on Twitter, they use the hashtag. I think it's at the bottom here. We'll get to it. But here's some stories from last week that were, and this is just copied from The Wire. So President Trump's move to shut down jihad training camps in America, Islamberg, is finished. Well, several widely shared articles report on last month's arrest of 64-year-old Ramadan Abdullah after a police raid found a weapons cache in the storage locker in Union Upstate New York.
Yes.
It's not. This is fake. Then the other story: the 14 fake olive oil companies are revealed now. Avoid these brands. The story from HealthyLivingThread.com cites the University of California study stating that almost 70% of olive oil in the American market is somewhat non-genuine. It goes on to suggest that olive oils in the U.S. market are being diluted with sunflower and canola oils. In reality, the 2010 UC Davis study, so it's a 7-year-old study, I found that 69% of samples taken from 14 brands of imported extra virgin olive oil failed to meet extra virgin standards, but the study did not find canola or sunflower oil. Then these are two interesting ones. Comedian Kathy Griffin is facing jail time. She's not, but
which comedian?
Kathy Griffin, she's the Anderson Cooper's former New Year's Eve partner, and she posted the photo of her holding Donald Trump's severed head.
Oh my lord.
She did cause a firestorm in May after a photo was released, and this is in the news today some more, because she says that she's been completely vindicated in the initial photo. But a story shared by Barnaby Bright and Patriots on the Right claims that she was jailed last month after walking around New York wearing fake blood in the Trump Halloween mask. That didn't happen. But let me go down a little bit. So here, if you look, Kathy Griffin facing jail time. And
Oh my gosh.
so the one in purple, that's the original one. Comedian Kathy Griffin is facing jail time. And here's what the story originally said.
Can I make a quick statement, if that's possible?
Sure.
The example that you just gave over there is similar to an example that was in a recent news report, which may or may not be fake or illegitimate or legit. That's for kids, that certain YouTube videos they look that should be kid-friendly, like Sesame Street or Rocket Power, for example, you click on, like DC Comics, for example. You click on that video, you think it's, legit cartoon, fun cartoon, witty. When you click on that particular YouTube video link, it is almost like something completely different. It's a violent masochist setting of someone dressed up as DC characters or villains being, brutally beaten. And that was recent, and we don't know if that's considered. I looked at that, I thought that was like, holy cow. But we don't know if that, for example, is legit or illegitimate.
Yeah, it's something to look out for sure.
Yes.
So here is the original Kathy Griffin facing jail time story that was a fake story. I can't read it on the screen, but I have a printout here. It says, as we know, Kathy Griffin made a video in which she was holding Trump's bloody head. She thought that was a funny video, but she was away from the public. Today she was walking around Central Park wearing a Trump Halloween mask covered in blood. Visitors at the park felt very disturbed by Griffin's appearance, and she's now facing prison. And if you know, Kathy is facing different types of trouble following her latest appearance. I mean, aside from the fact that nobody's ever heard of patriotsagenda.com, I mean, nobody's gonna write like that. And there's also no byline on this. It's by Patriots Agenda, and that's unusual, especially on a story of like this. I mean, this at the time when it was the biggest story going for a couple of days in the entertainment world, and there's no reporter at the planet that wouldn't want his or her name attached to it if they had the scoop that she was going to jail and this other thing. So, there are instances when we don't use bylines, and it's mostly on like short little briefs or something like that, but in general, that's a red flag. And then here is how it looked on another site that picked it up. See that breaking news?
Oh, God.
That means it's really important, even though,
Yeah, it is just that.
And then, so there's another one that I didn't read, but it was on the screen about the state of Wisconsin was building a border wall with Illinois, which is a great idea. But
For Wisconsin.
here we go. Well, to keep the Packer fans out, but
Fair enough.
but this is where they went to the site. It's create a prank and trick all your friends. This is channel23news.com. So if you want to create your own story later, go ahead. This is where you go. And then you just create the story, and then later on you can post it to Facebook. And this is what it looks like. See, share on Facebook. And that's all the story was. But it sort of went viral, and it got the AP to write about it, and so someone got a lot of web hits, and that probably translated to money if it was 60 Okay, this is from today. Lies spread faster than truth. So, okay, so about 2 o'clock this afternoon, the White House announced that Mr. Scaramucci is no longer, actually I don't think he ever started, but he's not going to be the White House communications director. And so I mentioned it. Yeah, and a colleague of mine says, oh yeah, he posted revenge porn pics of his wife over the weekend. I said, what? I know I had a weekend, but like I didn't do that. So yeah, look it up. I'm like, no. So I did look it up, and this is the story. And this was proven to be false. And here's some, the reason I bring it up is that something of this nature, I mean, all we've heard for the past 10 or 11 days is about the mooch is loose and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden this comes out. I mean, we all heard about the divorce, right? And they took advantage. This is actually not, I mean, it's fake news, but it's more like an Onion offshoot, it's like a satirical site. But they were taking advantage of, him being in the news, and I mean, it's believable to an extent. For some people, that suits what you want to believe, right? But it doesn't make it true, and so anyway, people are opportunistic, and will prey on your emotions, especially in something like this. And here's the real New York Times story where he was removed. And you see, posted a bunch of different places. Here's the Snopes. I went to Snopes just to show, and they say. So originally the Nevada County Scooper is that giveaway that it's fake news, by the way, but they're the outlet that originally posted it, and as a satirical piece, and Snopes response was, first off, what kind of adult reads the manifesto? Answer, we do, and apparently so do you. So congrats, Scooper is a satirical website. So I mentioned earlier about the code of ethics that journalists have, and I thought that I would just break a little bit of the more important ones down, because I don't know that we in the media, we take our lumps, rightfully so, when we need to, but I also don't know that the general public anymore is entirely aware of some of the things that we believe in, and some of what goes into it. Like you talk about anonymous sources, and there's this like belief that's coming up that anonymous sources aren't credible, which isn't true, or that fake news. I mean it's a legitimate strategy that certain politicians are using now it's like a code word. You can just say fake news and it's a, you know, like it discredits the story. And that's not necessarily the case. And even if there might be a detail wrong or something, we own up to that, but that doesn't make it a fake story. So you can't read that, obviously, but here's some the Society of Professional Journalists. This is all quoted from their code of ethics, and we at the Tribune and the Daily Southtown have a modified version of this. They're all basic, but most newspapers follow some form of the Society of Professional Journalists code of ethics. So I'll read parts of it. Members of the Society of Professional Journalists believe that public enlightenment is the forerunner of justice and the foundation of democracy. Ethical journalism strives to ensure the free exchange of information that is accurate, fair, and thorough, and ethical journalists act with integrity. And this is really big for all of us. And if anything is untoward, like we're not allowed to accept gifts, we're not allowed to, pay for sources, anything like that. And it's a big deal if you do that and you get caught doing it. And it has happened. I mean, there have been instances of that in the media, not at the Southtown. The Society declares these 4 principles as the foundation of ethical journalism and encourages their use in its practice. So seek truth and report it. It should be fair and accurate. You should be honest and courageous in gathering, reporting, and interpreting the information. So even if you know that somebody's going to say that this is fake news, you have to be, courageous enough to go after it. It might not make you any friends, but we're not out to make friends. We aren't the enemy of the people. We try to actually be the friends of the people and be on the people's side. We take responsibility for the accuracy of the work, verify information before releasing it, use original sources whenever possible. That means and this actually comes out a lot. So there might be a breaking news story, and another outlet says, so and so was charged with whatever. We're not going to take that and run with it. That outlet has that based on their own sourcing. We have to confirm that those sources before we put it out. And let me tell you, if we have something on anonymous sources, you have no idea the level of scrutiny that we have to go through to get an anonymous source in the print. It's a very rare occurrence. And it's not some willy-nilly thing. It's not like somebody can call up and say, hey man, did you know that the mayor is stealing? And I'm like, oh great, so I got an anonymous source that says the mayor's stealing. No, that's not how it works. We know who it is, the editor knows who it is, and usually a third person knows who it is. And we vet the person and the reason why the media use anonymous sources is to protect that source, because they're a whistleblower in most cases, and so they're trying to protect their livelihood, and they see something that isn't right, and so they want to let people know about it, and so they go to a reporter, and then we take it from there. And I won't go through every one of these, but following up on that, identify sources clearly. The public is entitled to as much information as possible to judge the reliability and motivations of sources. And there are instances where a source might come and say, I've got this juicy information, and you have, in deciding whether to use it, that's a legitimate concern that we take into account is, well, what's the motive behind it? Is this credible or reliable? And so that we make a determination from there. Diligently seek subjects of news coverage to allow them to respond to criticism or allegations of wrongdoing. We always give both sides an opportunity to speak, and if they say, well, there's a pending investigation, I can't talk about it. Well, they can talk about it, they just don't want to, and they've been told by their lawyer not to say anything about it, but that doesn't mean that they can't. So keep that in mind. And be vigilant and courageous about holding those with power accountable, give voice to their voices. Those are 2 that I hold very seriously. And it's kind of our mission as journalists is to give voice to the voiceless. And then a lot of times people say, I disagree with that story that Ted Slowick wrote. These are columnists in the South County. In fact, Breitbart called him Todd Slowick today for something he wrote. But those are not news. You see a story that has generally it's labeled opinion. If it's on the opinion page, the op-ed page, those are opinions. If it's got a picture accompanying the story, a lot of times that's also an opinion piece. It depends on the style, the newspaper and how their style is. But generally, most news reporters won't have their picture accompanying the story. So if you see the picture, that's generally when you know that it's commentary of some sort. And they are paid to be opinionated. You may not agree with their point of view, but it's a difference between biased reporting and they don't cross those. Those worlds are kept separate. And never deliberately distort facts or context. I won't go through this because we're short on time. I'll just give you the ethical journalists treat sources, subject, colleagues, and members of the public as human beings deserving of respect. We act independently. The highest and primary obligation of ethical journalism is to serve the public. Avoid conflicts, what I talked about earlier, avoid conflicts of interest, refuse gifts, favors, fees, free travel, and special treatment. Let me tell you, on the police blotter alone, I could have a new house if I would have taken some of the bribes that have been offered for just please keep me out of the police blotter. My wife can't know I was picked up. But unfortunately I can't do that because my job's really gone. And be accountable and transparent. Take responsibility for one's work and explain one's decision to the public. Anytime you have a problem with one of our stories, we will address it. We're happy to. And by the same high standards that we expect of others. So that's about it. I don't want to bore you too much, but